This is this guy's face, Rodrigo's face. He used more than 16 different identities and many more that are still not known. This is me. I'm a legal expert on digital image, identity, images, and online reputation. We have recently launched SEC for security on the internet, especially focused on celebrities. I'm a professor of intelligence analysis for open source at the University of Barcelona, also in the Public Security Institute in Barcelona. This is me.
Selva, ante todo, gracias a la organización, gracias a todos vosotros.
Thank you. We would like to thank all of you for being here. Instead of having a beer, you're all here on a Friday, which is a good thing. My name is Eduardo Sánchez. I'm a professor in vocational training. I teach students that are doing IT in several areas, basically networks and security, and systems administration. Apart from my daily work as a teacher, I collaborate with a number of companies. I'm also a lecturer at the University of Castilla-La Mancha in central Spain, at the University of Extremadura. I'm the organizer of a number of conferences. You've probably known me from the Hack and Beers conference. This is some conferences where presentations are accompanied by beer. So anything to do with cybersecurity. I love networking, and I love learning from other people I meet. So I'll leave you with Selva. She'll tell you about Rodrigo. She'll tell you about the basics on that case. There's many more people in the team, as she mentioned. And we'll show you how we got here. I don't want to spoil the story. She will tell you slowly, step by step. As I said, this is not just the two of us. There's a private detective as well. There's also an intelligence analyst. He's got a PhD. We have Ruth. She's there. She is one of our legal experts. We have a psychologist, a criminal psychologist, who analyzes profiles, criminals' profiles, in this case, Rodrigo. As you see, we have 5 solicitors, 5 lawyers, who are not necessarily involved in technology. They're all experts in criminal law, and they became involved through different tasks. Obviously, we had to explain things to them, so it's been a lot of hard work on telling them how to untangle the complicated mesh created by Rodrigo. Who is Rodrigo anyway? Well, he's been free for 20 years and nobody understands how that is possible after all the crimes he committed. To give you some background, he's 39 years old. No one knows about his education or training. He describes himself as a cultivated man with tattoos in his arms and the rest of his body. His family is from Marín, Pontevedra. This is all public information. And at least since 1996, he's been using the same modus operandi. You would flip out if you learned how someone would never be sentenced to anything after 16 years. The criminal psychologist, Jorge Jimenez, has done a complete profile for Rodrigo through testimonials from victims. And to give you an idea, when we started, we had some 20-something victims. It's now more than 60. This has grown exponentially in recent years, but not because he has acted on another 40 people, but because of the fact that no one knew that whoever was behind that picture was Rodrigo Nogueira, because he would use so many identities in the internet and outside. He is fully aware of what he has been doing. He has been defined as a parasite psychopath. To give you an idea of what someone does when they fit into that diagnosis, they use lies just as a working tool. What they usually do is to use a vulnerability in someone else for their own benefit. And obviously they attack when it is more complicated for the other person to be aware of what is going on. The type of lies they use will have an effect on the victims, and they know that perfectly. Out of those 63 victims have been attacked by Rodrigo, they had gone through something really severe, like losing a relative or getting divorced. What he would do in that situation was to exploit the victim's weakness. Rodrigo is aware of the fact that he's lying. He doesn't care. He doesn't care at all. He uses that lie for his own benefit, and that's how he commits his crimes. You will see in the charts, in the pictures he would use, they're all different. They have some similar items, some similar elements, but he never signs as Rodrigo. The most difficult part was to identify who he was, because he's used an ID from Italy, 15 different names, where an endless number of pictures where he cannot be recognized. I don't know if any of you has ever seen a statement from him in court. It has nothing to do with whatever you could have seen before. We've worked with a graphologist who is a specialist on that type of psychological profiles, and what she said was that in no case have they ever found their own writing, his own writing. If we had tried to find documents with a common denominator, the same handwriting, that would have been impossible. So who are the victims? Let's give you a summary. The first victim was in Galicia, in the northwest of Spain, which is where he comes from. He's from the province of Pontevedra, from the town of Marín. His first victims are relatives. This is usually the case. They usually start working on the nearest environment, and from then on, they deploy their skills. He started in Galicia, then he went to Marbella in southern Andalusia. There is a court ruling about a minor. She's not a minor anymore. She accepted telling us about it. She explained how everything happened.
He contacted her through IRC. He created a profile associated with an email account associated with the IRC, and then the photograph he was using was the same photograph that he used in a different profile, and then he took it from there. So from Marbella, he jumped to Madrid, from Madrid to Avila, then Burgos, then the Basque Country. A few years ago, he was in Catalonia, so we have placed a question mark on Mallorca because we have very many emails of a person telling us that she has suffered the same thing. However, we have not proved it yet, and the same goes for the Canary Islands. So it's a bit difficult to think that he has moved outside of Spain. He has traveled outside of Spain because his ID has expired a few years ago. So we found two types of victims. Some were targeted for financial reasons. So he wants the victims to own a home, to have their own means of transport, and then to have a number of devices that he likes, such as smartphones, a laptop, or iPad, or any other tablet that he will sell. And then these people should have a job or some financial means, so that these people do not feel the lack of money so much. Then also psychological victims, those who have undergone a severe or difficult events in their lives. And in the beginning, he used to go to be a to some dating websites, and he also had a professional profile on LinkedIn. He claimed that he worked in a company. Actually, he had documents from that company. However, that information was stolen from another victim. So therefore, he was changing his identity, drawing on his on previous victims. So these people have just lost a loved one, and they were undergoing lots of distress. He also used an Italian identity card. I don't know whether you have seen one of these cards. So apparently it is not very difficult to get one. That's what experts told us. And he not only attacked victims, but also hotels. He used to stay in those hotels, and then he also invited some of the victims, and then he met the victim there, and he stole the ID card from the victim. Then the victim sometimes had to pay the bill, sometimes as high as 5,000 euros. He also used false ID. Then he disappears from the premises, from the hotel. And then this week, we had to make an investigation because from a case in 2002 that occurred in Valencia, the director of the hotel has changed, and we had to contact this person in Canada because there is a debt was left in the hotel, a 5,000 euros debt. So there are two rulings, court rulings, a penal one and a civil one. The first one was ruled in 1997. He was taken to court against his will. Then the second one was a civil one, 3 times 3 arrests, very many reports, but not all the victims reported the case. Imagine how difficult it is for police to try and find a person especially if not all the victims report the case. So therefore, they do not provide the telephone number or the identity that had been stolen. And many of the victims that reported a case, they just reported or issued a report against some of the identities that he had used. Very difficult information to match. In some cases, the reports have been withdrawn because the people who decided to report him were in fear. Some of them decided that perhaps there was no solution to the case. Another victim says, because I have all my devices have been stolen, I cannot deliver any evidence. All the police forces, all the courts, so reports in very many different police stations across Spain. So since 1996 up until to date. And now there is a new case reported. And the big question, how could can this person commit a fraud for 21 years? He makes up an identity, contacts his victims, tells them different stories. To some of them, he said that he was a highly successful businessman. To others, he said that he was spending inheritance. And he also said in one of the cases that he was expecting someone to pay him a big bill. And because he presents himself as a highly successful person, victims feel that he doesn't need money. And then he either asks for money or he starts to steal credentials, for instance, banking credentials from the computer. He also steals credit cards as well as devices. He claims that he would take the devices for repair. He never comes back. Once that he's got credentials of the person and identity of the person, he just registers in places on behalf of that person. And we cannot prove that it was him because he withdraws different amounts of money from different ATMs. One of the victims was at home with a broken leg, and he continued to get information from the victims. I don't know how long it takes for a banking branch to delete the images from camera recording or CCTV recording. So often that takes 4 or 6 months. By the time they went to go back to the recordings, there were no recording. And actually, when we asked for money or we asked for a loan, he did that through the bank of the victim. He did that from the device of the victim and asked for a loan to the branch office of the victim. He never, ever uses any device on his name. He doesn't drive. He only uses a BlaBlaCar. He never uses a profile for his name or any of his known identities. What we have found is that he got a telephone number registered under another person's name. He registered on BlaBlaCar, and then before he gets on the car, he says, well, it was my girlfriend. She will not be traveling. I will be traveling instead. And the same goes for Airbnb. He never used a proper name on social media. He uses prepaid cards on register under third-party names. He doesn't use Wi-Fi on his name, so there is no contract with any telecom providers. He does not withdraw any money from his bank accounts. He uses credit cards of their victims. He uses Couchsurfing, Airbnb, all that with fake identities. And because he steals victims' devices, the various evidences on that device disappear. For instance, in a case once, we found a device that was being sold on Wallapop. But it was found because the victim, the moment she realized that device had been stolen, she did a tracking of the device, and it was a highly limited edition of the device. It was found on the internet, on sale. And why this man hasn't been caught? We could say very many things. Perhaps we found that the police and the judiciary database were not linked. A file was stolen. Also, a signature sheet had been lost. What else? Also, a device including 3 reports was also stolen. Also, a court loses the proceedings. Then the cause expired because there wasn't enough evidence. And for whom did we work all this time? For 2.5 years now, after working with victims on a daily basis, victims are to praise for their patience. They've been available 24 hours a day for any evidence to pass it on to us as soon as they had it, or for any relevant information. Whenever they had that, they gave it to us right away. We also carried out a number of searches on OOSINT with all the identities that we were finding along the way. And we also did a crawler for those dating websites. There was no way for us to crawl dating websites with all the identities that he was using out and in the network. We couldn't do that in an automated manner. And some of those tools could only be used on mobile devices. So the legal situation of the case was also complicated because the victims were left with no money. They couldn't pay for a lawyer. So therefore, the victims reported the case, and that was it. the transcription or the record of the victims' statements and testimony helped us a lot to find him or to go after him, and also a blog that was generated, and blogging, and after using all the CEO, his profiles could be well positioned so that if any of the victims were looking for an identity other than any of the identities that he used to use, Adrian Lopez, any identity that he used, so that that person would end up in that website. And we would like to thank the media. There came a time that we could not speed up the justice process anymore, and victims continue to appear, 3 new victims every month. Then we decided to go to the media to ask them for the cooperation so that they will help us mobilize not only professionals. So we are here in a fully uninterested manner. There is no, so no victims have received any money. So everyone has participated on a voluntary basis for no money. And these are some of the fake identities that he used. Roy Perez Alonso, Adrián Guinao. So there were no common denominators here, and because he burned the identities after the victim, after attacking the victim, so he left no traces. And what do we have now? We have logs with the different connection IPs that were left in one of the laptops. We just don't know why he left one of the victims' homes so fast, and he left all these accesses behind, because at that time he was not feeling SOTs, then he was using VPNs. He didn't use VPNs. So therefore, we found the connection IPs. We also find devices and browsers that were being used at that time. At least we knew the device he was using and the last connections he had used. Also images and videos, documentation, and then we went to the media. So after what Selva has just told us, to come figure out his profile, and when I discussed that with her, and I said, well, this is a huge challenge. He's been doing that for 21 years, more than 60 victims. Selva didn't mention that he was missing lots of teeth. I don't know how he could date girls. So in the photographs that we saw, we could see him with his mouth closed. And he was meeting or attacking 5 or 6 people simultaneously. He was adopting different identities and playing different roles to attack his victims. And then we say, how can we locate this user through social media and through his use of the social media? In this case, we found, well, we decided to use several techniques. The first thing that I mentioned to Selva was the following. And I said, let us do some kind of beacons so that those websites including, or sites including his information, will help us monitor him. So we tried to analyze all the connection data of all the users, and let us try to locate a profile. And say, well, perhaps we would end up with lots of profiles. So he used like high-end telephones. They were not on his name. They were registered under the victim's name. And obviously the geographical area, because we had IP addresses, in this case for social media. If he scammed any of the victims and he took the social media away from her, he used to connect from different locations. If it was not the victim connecting, it was him. And the first thing that we considered was making a tracing through HTML5 technology. So the disadvantage is whether the user will be asked to permission. And how are we going to get that type of information? I'll be showing you the scripts right now. How our beacon will get that type of information. We can use it from the IP and also from the connection points and the telephony networks. And so I'll show you how powerful that script is to locate a person. I don't know whether you have read the privacy policy in terms of Google geolocation, the Google geolocation services. Here it says, we will gather information based on the characteristics of the device, information about Wi-Fi routers around you, the ID of the telephony towers closer to you, IP address, user agents, unique ID. So therefore, we are giving lots and lots of information to Google. So I'm not, well, very many of you use Google, and you know that. You know that Google has lots of information from us. So therefore, I said, well, I have two types of devices. The mobile devices, the laptops. Mobile devices, I know that he will be using geolocation and information from GPS or the entry box or access points. You don't need to have the GPS enabled so that you are located. Actually, you connect through Google Maps, you disable GPS, and the mobile network gives you directions. And it tells you where you are because of the compass of your device. When you do that from a laptop, for instance, in this case, the information that is used is information from the points of access from which the device is connected. And Google has that information. And not only that, you can access that information. And when you install the search engine, a token is given so that when it comes to exchanging, so to speak, information with Google, for Google to store that information, they track that token with us. What is the level of detail that we can get through our scripting? I'll show you the tool that I developed for that. And what else? Well, we know that the user will not enable Google to locate, to access to his location. So the database of PHP gathers information about the geographical area of the IPs of the world. But there is a disadvantage to this database, that being that the cheapest one is $700. However, in Russia, you can find anything. Thanks to our Russian friends, we have a good database, which is included in our scripts and in our beacon. So we have left a number of baits in some webs so that we could trace the number of users accessing those points. And what is the information that Google has about us? Has lots and lots of information only by scanning a QR code. So this that you have there is a cut link. It goes to my Twitter account. First goes to a Russian server. How many of you access to this type of links without checking it? We all do it. So that stores information, takes you right away to Twitter, and I'm using the shortened link to hide the place where it actually goes to, and what is information about us that Google stores. So the web browser, the number of clicks, operation system, location, what other information, what else? So this is just a small sample of the information that Google has about the users. What can we do? When I look into Google API, you can do 3 things here. If you are a developer, you can gain access to 200 queries, so that unless you make more than 50 queries per second, this API is free. What is the information that I get? Geolocation information by providing 3 things. Either the IP from which you connect without giving any parameter to it, you just get the IP from where you are being connected, or to give to MAC from close access points, so that that information will help us get geolocation coordinates in return, and you will be surprised at how easy it is to locate you accurately. So by using 2 max and the signal intensity, if Google has that information, Google will position us, will locate us right here. And now my question, how many of you in this room use Android and give Google access to all the information on your smartphone? Your smartphones are providing information to Google about all the maps and all the access points where you are. So therefore, if at a given point in time you enable GPS, or you are connected to a telephony antenna, you can also be located. The third way to access is through cell towers. Then you give a number of parameters, and it also locates you. As we said before, if you disable GPS, you are only connected through mobile network, you are still accurately located. And then by using this API, you send a request to Google, then you get information back, and you store that information. So therefore, the user is accessing to a place where you are not only getting the IP, user agent type of device, etc., but you also have geolocation information, but not only on database such as the MaxMind, these are private databases, but I'm also accessing the information that Google stores. So get information from the most knowledgeable. And I wonder where there are many of us who are providing information to Google, but they also have their own devices. So in these Google Street View sites, you get to see they have information about the location of cars. And you wonder, do you spend so much money just to have that, or to deliver that information to users, and to offer these resources for free to users? So they use this type of cars to take photos. This is also a Google backpack for trekkers. Also the Street View card. If you go to a museum, Google is there getting information. And also when you go skiing. And this is my preferred one. So you are cycling, or you see this bike with this camera. So in 2013, Germany find Google for getting information that was not legit. Okay, Google cars were driven around cars, and they were just capturing information about MAC access points. That information was stored in the database, and they said this MAC is located here or there. Therefore, you would be surprised about hearing the large amount of information that you can get access to through an API, a developer API. Well, perhaps, who knows, Google will start using segways. And I seen Chema this morning with his skate. I don't know. Perhaps Google will start using skates to continue gathering information. All right. And now let us talk about gathering information from users and what happens if that user moves about. How can we identify a user moving across several IPs? In that case, we will make a fingerprinting of our search engine. If we analyze the source that is used, the plugins that are used, we can create a hash. Therefore, by the time the person will move somewhere else, we will be able to identify that use. If all that information from social media, from connections made by Rodrigo, we will be getting closer to the location where he might be. And what is the information that we use in fingerprinting? In this case, this is the information that we will be getting through the search engine of a person accessing that site where we have placed our beacons. What happens now? Once you reach this point, we have lots and lots of information, and we want to analyze that information. And now I'd like to share with you the tool that we used for that. So we want to use that information, analysis of that information, to do OOSINTs and to identify several profiles. So now I'm going to show you the tool that we used for that. Oh, thank you.
Let me see if we still have a connection. The data you see there is test data. We will have two websites, M1 and S1. In general terms, we have the number of OSs, operating systems. We see the beacon. We see the cities, the logs that we have of those cities. Those logs, let me show you. This one, for example. Those logs give us a lot of information that then we translate using the tool. What we mentioned at the beginning on location, to what level of detail can we get with those scripts, with HTML5? Well, take a look at this. Just by launching the script right now, we're using the mobile network. And this places us right in the center of Madrid. Not too much precision. If we did that using a landline, using Wi-Fi from our home, if we had a landline connection, it would be giving us exactly the point where we are. The problem with locating using mobile networks has this drawback. Bear in mind, and we didn't see it here, because this is the first script using HTML5. You have to allow it to go for location. If we use geolocation using MAC address, there's one by default. Well, yesterday at lunchtime, I used 2 MAC addresses. And you see exactly where we were having lunch yesterday. Okay, you know where we had lunch. I just launched the scan when we were having lunch. I chose the signal intensity, and just by giving it 2 points, or 3 access points, it locates me perfectly. You would be surprised about the amount of information that Google has and how it can position you in ways you wouldn't think of. I mean, in theory, there shouldn't be information about that. And then on cell phone base stations, unless we install a certain application, or if we had an application to which we gave permissions to access the information on our mobile network, just by the mere fact that we are connecting to the mobile network, by using the ID for the base station and the LAC, the local area code, because the code for the country and for the network are always the same. Just take a look at what happens. It can locate us. This is from last night on our way to the hotel. Kinepolis, the Eurostar Hotel, across the road. It can give you the location with quite a nice degree of accuracy. So we have to do a beacon that is transparent to the user, or almost transparent, as we said before. No VPNs, nothing. The user doesn't care about that. This is an example of the information used by the beacon, or collected or gathered by the beacon, that is being obtained locally. That's Windows 8.1. That's the Chrome version. The IP, right, is not there. It generates a unique identifier through the timestamp. And in this case, just take a look at the postcode and the geolocation coordinates. How does it do that? Well, through the different scripts that we put together for that beacon. We'll see the analysis in a minute. Then we have fingerprinting. If we open it and ask it to do a digital fingerprint for this, it applies a hash based on those parameters. It opens the browser. So it's a hidden session. It's got a number of plugins. It uses a different configuration, and yet the data it uses to do fingerprinting is exactly the same. Okay? You see it? Fingerprinting for hidden browsing and for the other one are the same. What am I achieving by doing this? The user might be moving, and yet we will be able to identify them, because almost always they will use the same browser. We either use Chrome or Firefox, whatever, but users tend to stick to the same browser. Within the tool, the most interesting part, which is what I left for the end, is the one on analysis. Now that we have the logs, we can see detailed information and apply filters. If we filter regarding access through certain cities or certain dates or certain websites where we'll have the beacon, we will be able to collect a lot of information and understand that information on that device. Information collected by the beacon. In fact, the database at MaxMind compares it with Google geolocation. If you take a look at the top, you see the error in the geolocation. That's why it doesn't give you exactly the same point. But you can have an idea. And here you have a fingerprint for that tracing. Just take a look at this. The user himself has connected from the same IP, but if he had connected from different IPs and they were moving to different locations, we would still have the user identified by the fingerprint. Okay, so now that I've shown you the tool, I'll let Selva tell you about how we can use this. If we use a little bit of social engineering, and we have a number We have a list of phone numbers. I'm not going to give you clues, but if you get someone to click on a link, it will be very likely that we can geolocate that user quite reasonably. Yes, what Edu was saying is that this was very useful. When messages were sent to the media, we knew that those websites for which we had beacons, he would go in. Why? Well, because he wanted to know to what extent he was being traced by the media. We knew the last device he had. We knew the last location for him. So what we did was to try and delimit a perimeter for his physical whereabouts. He was arrested. That was huge. He was arrested, and that was huge. And the most striking thing is that the person that got to him is in this room. I cannot tell you who that person is, but that person was so courageous. We succeeded. We know for a fact that lots of people have come across him, but he disguises himself so skillfully that it was so difficult for anyone to report on him. So this person saw a report published in El Confidencial, the Spanish digital newspaper. The person realized that this was the person they saw. And the next day, when Rodrigo went to their shop, they requested his phone number. Give me your phone number and I'll give you a call so that I can confirm when the material comes. I don't want to give you all the clues. The person called the National Police, and they basically ambushed Rodrigo 2 streets away from the shop. He was arrested. Wow. Just remember the amount of people involved, the number of victims, the number of hours we've spent on this. We wanted to explain that the fact that he was arrested doesn't mean that he will be in prison forever, so we will ask for your help at the end of the presentation, because we would need your help. So why was he arrested? Because of the unconditional support of the victims. I mean, those victims were left in bankruptcy. Basically, they went bust. They had no money. And there were some very sensitive things, extremely sensitive things happening to them. They've been giving us information all the way along. SEO at the Molestafa blog on the different identities for Rodrigo, and then the constant presence of the media, and then the person from Alcázar that was able to identify Rodrigo, beyond any doubt. And we really need to thank the Civil Guard, because they put together a tweet where they alerted about Rodrigo. Kudos for the Civil Guard. There was a before and an after. This is what he looks like now. Can you tell the difference between the Rodrigo we have at the bottom and this guy getting into the courthouse? They don't look alike. Not at all. Just imagine trying to get hold of someone who was that way and who is this way now. I mean, if they're chasing you, you'll do whatever you need. So the help we need from you, he's in prison until the 28th of March. After that, he will go to another court case. But since justice works the way it works, we have no idea what will happen, because they're even prosecuting one of the victims. We would need to untangle the digital footsteps of this guy. Okay, we've done it with all the identities. But it was only last week that I got a message from someone coming to Rooted. This person told me by looking at some databases, I found one of the email addresses that Rodrigo used to use in the past. I can lend you a hand to try and find out. We would need to untangle additional things, and then there are additional victims who have no idea that this was Rodrigo in the first place. So we really need to keep publishing information, not just about the identities that he has been using, but also about the channels where he had a presence. And besides, he might come out after the 28th of March. So please collaborate with us. If the victims were here, and we found 67, we are sure that there's many more, because we get emails constantly. So what we expect from you, if you want to help, as soon as you find out, please help us get the evidence. And that means talking to victims, having an interview, so that you can find out about the digital identity that was being used, and then certify the evidence, and then report it to the police or the civil guard, whenever the victim is willing to do so, of course. Some are only witnesses. And that's it from us. We wanted to thank you for accepting a talk which is quite unusual, quite peculiar compared to the rest. And thank you very much indeed to the person in this room that was courageous enough to say, I'm moving forward. Before we go to the Q&A, please bear in mind that there's no offense meant. You can buy poisoned evidence as well. If I was the lawyer or the legal expert on the other side, I would confront that. Okay? Questions?
Preguntas, chicos. Mira.
Questions, guys? Somewhere there in the middle. Hello. Well, above all, I would like to thank you for two things. One for the talk and the other one for the amount of hard work. Unbelievable. We could be victims. My question is, what type of logic, or what sort of instinct did you apply to use the beacons, and in what websites? Obviously, you would have more than one beacon. So what type of logic or rationale did you apply? We had a legal limitation. Okay, it was Ruth telling us all the time about the legal limitations. And obviously Elisenda would tell us, because she's the private detective, she would say yes or no to everything. So what we decided was to go for the website that we mentioned before, and then additional websites where we replicated the content. Those are the ones he would check because of his ego and his own sense of safety. Over here, Alberto, behind you. The microphone, please. Hello. Above all, congratulations for that talk. You mentioned before that this guy had no specific education, no specific training in anything. But I had the feeling that he knew a little bit about IT because he used VPNs. So what degree of technical expertise did he have regarding IT? Well, back in 2000, he enrolled in a module. He never completed it. He conned 2 students. No, I'm not joking. This is real. We've talked to students. He's been adapting his behavior based on the needs he had at every point in time. We got a log with details about one of the last victims, and he was worried about securing himself. In fact, we said that he didn't use VPNs, but he used Tunnel Bear when he was not at the victim's place. During the investigation, did he feel that he was being that someone was going to head hold of him? Well, securing himself, digitally speaking, I don't know, but he would go out as little as possible. In fact, we had an alert that mobilized an entire team, a TV crew. There was an IP from a town in Alicante, in southeastern Spain, and it made sense because 40% of the local residents were foreigners. Since we had been exposed to the media, this is what we were expecting. I have to say that we didn't use more human resources and more technical resources because victims don't have the money to pay for them. So we needed to beg from different professionals that they could lend us a hand. And that's why it was so difficult in some situations to get hold of him. We knew that he would adopt security and safety measures at different points in time. Bear in mind that whenever he detected a different level of activity, he would disguise himself in a different way, and then he would change to other social media, move to other social media. If you had located him in Facebook, you would lose track of him and realize that he was in other social media, until he found a victim and we could locate an IP or something. There is a period of time for which we have no information. Trying to pull the entire history since the day he started all the way up till now to try and have all the historical information, because we know about victims, but we don't know what he was doing at that time. So he got all the money from the bank account for one of the victims whilst the victim was in hospital. During all that time, she was not aware that she was being robbed. Of course, she wouldn't save information about her account, and that's what we'd need to get hold of. Questions? Hi. I imagine that with fingerprinting you would use additional data, apart from what you mentioned. But bearing in mind that there is a limited set of data, did you take into account the potential collisions? And then, if you're doing fingerprinting for a certain user, I guess you could have done it on me. To what extent is that legal? I don't want to get you into an embarrassing situation, but let me just tell you that before you used a beacon, we spent 2 weeks with the private detective, with the lawyers, talking to lots of people, so that we could know to what extent we could search information. The limit, when you use Google Analytics, you cannot relate certain information with someone called whatever, X. If a user goes in, named Eduardo Sánchez, you cannot trace information about that user. That is illegal. But then if you perform an analysis and you realize that you have an X number of users with this and that information, as far as you don't correlate that with someone with a specific ID, you're on the safe side. I understand that this is in support of other things rather than final conclusions. Of course, the information that we could gather would help us with the case. As soon as you have a number of addresses and pieces of information, and you realize that they have that he has connected from a certain location, you start matching locations to IPs and things like that. Let me also say that the information we gathered from the 100 and something IPs that he had used, because the owner of a website is one of the victims, and he had access to that website, we knew it could only be him. Well, it could only be him. So based on that, we had to extract information on the devices that he might have been using. We got the information about the type of device that he was using, so we started matching the different details. iPhone 7, that's where we started. That's where we started cornering him, okay? More questions? At the top, well, congratulations on that talk. Very comprehensive. Just one little question from me. Why do... This was quite a famous character. He was very well known, relatively well known. But he had never been arrested. His whereabouts were always unknown. So what do you think the main reason was for getting away with it for so long? And the second question is, if he goes free, if he's set free, how can we avoid him from disappearing? How can we prevent him from disappearing again? Thank you. Thank you. To your first question, I would like to say that he was not famous until information was published in one of those blogs. For the first 16 years of his criminal career, he was completely anonymous in the network. People would try and find him because they were conned by him, but he was not known. And then there were some comments after the publication took place in Foro Coches, another major forum in Spain, but no information was given to try and get him. And then what we said in the last slides, there's been, I don't know, bad luck, files that were lost, not enough information available for certain arrests. He was told to go to a certain court to sign every 2 weeks. And to the second question, how can we prevent him from disappearing again? I will not rest. I will not give up. Not me, not the victims. So any evidence we have, if you could help us untangling the mesh, that might be useful for a court case. I would encourage you not to lose track of what this means for your lives, because this is strong. This has an impact. And then I'm very interested in psychopathic profiles. I've read a lot about this. I love everything that was written by Robert Hurd. So it would be interesting if you could tell us. Is that profile more common in a community like ours? I'm just so sorry that Jorge didn't come, because he's got his own opinions. He's very clear about what he thinks. Estimates tell us that 15% of the population have psychopathic traits or are pure psychopaths. Functional or parasite psychopaths. The average number of people we will encounter is 90 in our life. Not bad. Not necessarily our partner. In fact, Iñaki Piñuel, who has been helping us, he's got a PhD in psychology. What Iñaki says is that the problem is that psychopaths may be in a relationship and you allow them a lot of things because they're your partner. If you go to a shop and you meet someone who is really mean, you simply think that they're mean. But what they're doing is bashing anybody going to the shop. The most difficult thing about this is not just its difficulty, the intrinsic difficulty in acknowledging that someone is a psychopath. We need to know that the fact that they're a psychopath is not an excuse. They are aware of what they do. They don't suffer. It is not a disease. It's not like sociopathy where you do suffer. In his case, his behavior is exactly the same. It is obvious that regardless of the prison sentence he gets, he will never change. Answering the second part of that question, Roman, I don't think so. As the civil guard was saying yesterday, we're not autistic in this world. Far from it. In any area, in any walk of life, you're bound to find psychopaths. But since we deal with technology to such an extent, we are related to psychopathic traits in different ways. But you can find psychopaths anywhere, in hospitals and anywhere else. In fact, just one last thing. I forgot something which is really important. He has an accomplice. A female accomplice who is someone from his environment, not a relative. He had a relationship with that person. She's the one that gives him coverage for everything he does. So about that person, it would be so important for us to find out as much as we could. I'm saying this because the issue of psychopathy, they might not get in a relationship with a partner, but in this case, he has a partner. One last question. Over there. Hi Edu, hi Selva. Congratulations for your talk, and above all for the amount of hard work. It's unbelievable. I'd like to ask you a question. Apart from mentioning what you said about our female accomplice, it is obvious you cannot give us a name. Victoria Villalibre, that's her name anyway. A question. Roy has two contradicting things. He hides, on the one hand, but then he cons people. He gets turned on because he knows that he's been chased. When in El Confidencial we published the first articles, we had no doubt. He gets a hard on when he knows that he's being chased. To what extent are you scared that he might set a trap for you? Perhaps the information you were collecting was leading you in the wrong direction, because he cannot imagine that there's an entire team after him. But were you a bit afraid that he might be planting information to make you make the wrong decisions? I was not scared. By no means. We would not pay attention to just isolated pieces of information. Whenever a victim says something,
se dedican a hacer unas búsquedas que es brutal. O sea,
So it seems that we have like a legion of people to check whether that information is real or not. And in 2015, I think it was a profile that was published on the Instagram where he said that he was at El Bulli restaurant. And he said that he was there. We started to search for him, but then someone published a photograph that he was in, but he was in a different place in Spain. So as I say, we didn't use isolated pieces of information. So thank you very much for your help. And then regarding our concern, well, that's my alarm. Time is over. And then in terms of our concern, so for instance, if you go and say to someone in this room is that they cannot do anything technically, you will be generating motivation, you will be driving their motivation. And that was our motivation. We want to catch this person, and we knew that we could do it. Hours as many as needed, tools as many as needed. And as I say, always on the limit, and lots of motivation. We were actually going for him. And well, the power of social media. Social networks are very, very powerful. And social media helped a person in this room, a person who crossed this person, who met this person. You see that this person is completely different from the person that we saw in the first photograph. and that person contacted the law enforcement agencies, and then, well, thanks to that, this person is not behind bars. So I'd like to say hello to Carlos. Carlos, I hope that next year you will give me the good news that to come over here and to tell me that you have gotten hold of a person in Barcelona. So give him the mic. Yes, I accept information only if you allow me to wear the disguise of a hacker, of a typical hacker. I am disappointed. I see people around really well dressed, no hats, no nothing. When I type in hacking and images, the images that I get are not related at all and not similar at all to how you are dressed today. So I'm going to ask Almeida her tweet. She said, what a hackers conference where police forces have the control. And I'm going to answer, well, you person who believes in a community where this person feels out of the community. So there are no typical things here. We are atypical. So any questions? Any more questions? Hello? Edu, Selva, thank you very much for your investigation. So my question is the following. He was moving about for a long time. Didn't you find any victims abroad? For instance, in Europe? So, well, his ID had expired, but what about his passport? Yes, his passport had also expired. So there is a victim from Valencia, and she went abroad as well. So we were afraid of him moving to Portugal, but we have no evidence about that. What about the time in between victims? Yes, she overlapped victims. She was attacking 5 and 7 victims simultaneously. So actually, he lived with one of his victims for a couple of days, and he was working with 5 or 7 profiles simultaneously. So he was just cultivating or working on different profiles, and right after burning a victim, he moved right away to the next victim, and that's why we refer to him as a parasitic psychopath. So victims didn't dare to speak, but some of them, after this, decided not to have a telephone anymore. So one of the victims tried to take her life. Others had a son from him. So thank you very much for your great presentation. So thank you very much.
There's not a problem that I can't fix.